Well, good morning, all.
Good morning.
It's a nice summer morning to be out, isn't it? And inside air conditioning. I always appreciate that. So, get right to this message here today. We're going to be talking about God's justice. Before we do that, I got a couple questions here, maybe kind of draw you into this dilemma that this great prophet in the Old Testament was struggling with. When you think about why people have questioned the existence of God, why they, in their mind, he's not worth believing in or following or giving themselves over to, what are some of the things that come up in their thinking or their reasoning? Suffering. How can people suffer if God is so good and loving and he could do something about it? What else?
Can't see him.
Can't see him. That's right. All we see is his people who sometimes don't always do the very best job they can in demonstrating who he really is. What's some other reasons?
Too many rules.
Too many rules. That's right. We don't need any more rules. What else?
I think this is good. Why wouldn't he give it to me if he loves me?
Why doesn't he give me the things I know I need? They're good for me. And he seems to be keeping things back from me. Those are good reasons. Now, let me ask you this. That's what people in the world are saying, and I happen to agree with you, and there's some other reasons. What are some things that cause you, as a follower of Jesus Christ, to sometimes doubt his love, his presence, and things like that? And if you're going to sit there and say, I never have any doubt, are you being truthful with yourself? Really? The silence. I've been praying for things for a long time, and God, anytime you want to answer me, what's some other reasons that we have that we kind of struggle with? What? I thought you said chili pepper. When children suffer. That's not right. I heard something over here. When evil prevails. Why? Come on, God. Do something about it. Actually, that's the message of Habakkuk, and we're going to be turning to that. If you have a Bible with you, it's on page 785 if you're looking in the Bible in the seat in front of you. Habakkuk is a book that is a struggle of a prophet, a man of God, who looked around himself and said, where the heck are you, God? Are you not aware of what's going on? Do you not see the injustices? Do you not see the pain and the suffering, the evil? All of this is going on, God, and you seem to be on vacation. So where are you? And that was a struggle some 600 years before Jesus was even born. And then that's when this book was written. It was written at a time when, right before the Babylonians came and took Israel, or the southern kingdom of Judah, into captivity. And for 70 years, they were going to suffer the consequences of their own rejection of God. But Habakkuk is there, and he sees this stuff, and he is struggling. And the theme, or this idea of this book of Habakkuk, we're going to be in this book for the next 3 weeks, is this: where is God, and what is he about doing in light of all of this evil and injustices and such forth going on in the world today? And believe it or not, I think Habakkuk could have wrote this book today, and it would have been just as relevant. I mean, when we look out there in the world today, it's hard not to just get a sense of, man, this world is crazy. This is nuts. What are people thinking of? Look at the evil. Look at the injustices. Look at the lack of goodness and so much seems to be going on. Now, I'm not saying there aren't good people from human perspectives in this world, but we seem to be more and more the minority. And the majority just seems to be people are allowed to go ahead and do whatever they want, no matter who they hurt or how much it causes pain. And that's what Habakkuk is. Habakkuk was a prophet, and by the way, you can call it Habakkuk if you want, because I'm clueless on how to pronounce his name. Habakkuk. Your choice. And I may be saying both today, so forgive me for that. But Habakkuk had a faith that was struggling. He was perplexed by the absence of God in light of all the suffering in the world. And that's what we're going to be looking at today in this first chapter. Next week we're going to look at, Jeff is going to be up here sharing a little bit about chapter 2. and answering some more of these questions here. But we're going to look at here, we're going to begin by just taking a look at verses 1 through 4 and see just what Habakkuk is complaining about. Okay? Now, as we read this, I'm sure you're going to say, boy, I can relate to that, because I see it in our world today too. Beginning here in verse 1, he says, the oracle of Habakkuk, the prophet, saw. And beginning in verse 2, he says, O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear, or cry to you violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted. If you're familiar with the history of Israel, taken out of captivity in Egypt by God led them out through Moses, and they came into the promised land and conquered it through the leadership of Joshua, and then they had these judges. And during that time of judges, it seemed like they had this up and down relationship with the Lord. When they were in trouble, they bowed down and followed the Lord and cried out for Him, and God would rescue. But as soon as they were prosperous and free from trouble, they seemed to have forgotten their God and would accept the ways of the Canaanites and the pagan religions in the area, and idolatry came in. And this basically went on when there was a strong king in Israel, like King David, or they were prosperous, and yet they followed the Lord. But then there were kings who turned their back on God and invited, along with the religious leaders, idolatrous actions and activities in the country, and started to do the things that God said, this is not good. It's not part of who I am. And that's what the law was about, to say, if you walk this way, you will reflect my character, and the goodness of me will become part of your life. But they didn't trust God, they didn't believe. And so essentially the history of Israel is one of trusting God and not trusting God. But as the years went on, it was more not trusting in God and less trusting in God, to the point where the 10 tribes up in Samaria were taken into captivity in the 8th century BC, and now Judah was left, and they were facing deportation, facing their own captivity, even though God warned them through the prophets time and time and time again. If you follow the ways of the people of the Canaanites, the Philistines and the Egyptians and the Assyrians and all the nations around you, you will be walking away from me, and I will send you into captivity. And He does that in order to save people. He does it to put a stop to the very actions that will destroy them. Well, we're at this place now in Judah's history, around 620 years before Christ, where Habakkuk is a godly man, and he just looks around and he says, this is nuts. This is crazy, God. Do you not see what is going on here? He uses words like violence, speaking of the fact of actions of harm perpetrated against innocent people. He talks about iniquity or wickedness, those actions that destroy the morality or the human morals system that God had given them to live with. And all this time, God seems to be absent. And he was crushed in his spirit. And you think about this, this could have been written today in the year 2022. In fact, I think in many regards, we're no better off and even worse off than the situation that Habakkuk was in. How many of us have not found ourselves praying for our country? God, restore our country. But let's take a look at this again. He calls out, how long, O Lord, must I call for help? Have you been in that situation? It may not be for justice, but you're calling out for help, right? And you kind of get to the point, say, God, enough of this. I'm tired of praying. I'm tired of calling out. You either are not here or you can't hear me. What is going on? How long do I have to do this? You don't seem to be listening to me. He says, look at the violence out there. Innocent people are being hurt, God, and you seem to not care. I mean, that's the initial response that some of us have at times. God, if you really cared about me or cared about my family or cared about my community or cared about us, you would come and do something about that, the very things that are destroying our country, our communities, and our families, and sometimes even our churches. But you don't save. He goes on, he says, why do you make me look at this injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing, destruction and violence before me? There is strife and conflicts abound. How many of us can look at the news or just read the news and just get tired of it, what you read? I used to be a news junkie. I used to love listening to news, reading different articles. I'd go on the internet and look at the search engine and look at different things going around the world. And I'm telling you, the last year or so, it just seems less and less I even want to do that, because there's nothing new going on out there. There's wars, there's destruction, there's poverty. In fact, these are pictures that just remind us that our world is really broken. We have pictures of poverty, and I'm not sure what country this is in, but I do know from just easy things to find out, in countries like South Africa, you can have a place like this where people are forced to live in extreme poverty right next door to very wealthy neighborhoods. And what separates them is this big stone wall. That's not justice. That's not fair. You have violence, political violence, violence in the streets, and this is a picture of our own country taken just a few years ago. I'm not going to sit here and say one side is right or the other side is wrong. I'm just looking at the fact that we live in a very violent society where people who don't get what they want and believe in it are willing to hurt other people to get that, to defend what they think is right. You have war-torn cities. This is a picture out of Syria not just too many years ago. I know we're hearing about the war and the destruction in the country of Ukraine, which we should be aware of. But look what's going on in the Middle East as I know, there it is. There, put it down and walk away, right? This is what's going on, and we say, God, where are you? Where is that justice? Where is your intervention? Do you not care? And we call out to God. And then this next slide, I mean, this just kind of bunch of words that I found, and this is, put it down. There we go. Murder, wickedness, sin, abuse, violence, envy, greed, brutality. It goes on and on and on, and hatred and things like this. And God, this isn't the way it was supposed to be. And do you know why it bothers us? Because inside, God has given us a sense of rightness and wrongness. And I know we grow out of those things. I know as we go older, our prejudices and our egos get involved, and all of a sudden we can redefine what is morally right or morally wrong. But when we ever go back to the Word of God, and that's basically where Habakkuk was, he's saying, listen, God, you yourself have said these things are wrong. And the question now is, where is your justice? You know, justice is blind, and that's why this woman depicting justice, she has that cover over her eyes. And by that, justice is blind, it means it has no prejudices. It just sees the fact. But from Habakkuk's viewpoint, justice is not even looking at what's going on. And that's his complaint. And we have to admit, folks, we have our complaints too. And where is God? Well, God's going to answer Habakkuk in this book here. And he answers it in a way that is just absolutely dumbfounds the prophet. What the Lord is about to say to Habakkuk is something that he never would have expected. Something that caused him to stop, pause, take a deep breath, and say, God, you've got to be kidding. Let's take a look at what he says here. The Lord's answer, verses 5 through 11. Look among the nations and see, wonder, and be astounded. For I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans. By the way, the Chaldeans are the Babylonians. Verse 6. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation, who march through the breadth of the earth, to seize dwellings not their own. They are dreaded and fearsome. Their justice and dignity go forth from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards, more fierce than the evening wolves. Their horsemen press proudly on. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle, swift to devour. They all come for violence, all their faces forward. They gather captives like sand. At kings they scoff, and at rulers they laugh. They laugh at every fortress, for they pile up earth to take it. Then they sweep like the wind and go on, guilty men whose own might is their God. The Lord answers Habakkuk, and he understands that what he's about to say to Habakkuk is not within the reasoning powers of Habakkuk to understand. Who would have thought that God would deal with evil with another form of evil? And that's what his answer is. But it seems to me when we look at this passage, what we're understanding is that God delivers justice with the same kind of value that this equated with the sin itself. It's kind of like an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth kind of a thing. Here, okay, Israel, you don't want anything to do with me. You pursue these other nations and their values. You worship their gods. You bow down to them. You get involved in cultish practices and the violence, and your powerful people abuse the weaker people. Your priests are bringing sacrifices and not offering them to me, but offering them to gods that are made up in human minds and things like that. That's your choice. So what I'm going to do now is bring people over you just like those you want to become. And now you are going to experience the very same thing that you have longed for. And his punishment fits the crime. He uses words, he talks about the Babylonians. Now, the Babylonians were the rising power in these days. The Egyptians were still a very powerful nation south of Israel, but they were not nearly capable of moving into this area and helping, being a powerful source. The Assyrians, who took the northern tribes into captivity, they were also on the downturn. Like many nations, they have periods of great strength and great power, but they last only as long as God permits them to do. But there's a new power on the streets now, and it was the Babylonians. We know of Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of the Assyrians, or the Babylonians, when they took Jerusalem into captivity in 605 to 586. A couple times he came down there and removed people into captivity. But they had a reputation. He talks about them being this wonderful army that it was equipped with a powerful cavalry. That would be like the equivalent of tank battalions that countries have, and artillery, but they were swift. He says they're swift like leopards, or as dangerous as wolves at night, and nobody wants anything to do with these people. There are some things he talks about them in this passage that is just astounding. He says, look among the nations and watch. Be utterly astounded. And what God is basically saying here is, you think I'm not doing anything. But just when you think I'm not doing anything, beware, because I'm doing things behind the scene that you're not even aware of. And that is so true in our own lives. When we think God is absent, when we think God isn't there for us, He's really at work. Something's at work. And He says, for I will work a work in your days which you would not believe, though it were told you. And the issue here that God knows is going to confuse Habakkuk, and often confuses me, is that in His sovereignty and in His wisdom, He will use that, He will even use evil to confront other evil. He will even use a greater evil. In fact, He goes, for I am raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous people who march through the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs. He's going to take away the sovereignty of Israel, the sovereignty of God's people, because of their rejection of Him. And then they sweep past like wind and go on, guilty people whose own strength is their God. I put that passage up here because of what it really tells us is the fact that when the Babylonians would come in here, they were fearful of no one or no nation. They didn't conceive of accountability. They had no God other than their own strength. So when they came in, it was nothing to kill people, to murder people. And I know this is pretty graphic here, but they would rip open the bellies of pregnant women. They did it to terrorize, but they also did it to destroy the will of the people and to prevent another army to come up. When you kill the babies off, there's no one to grow up. But this is what Israel was facing, and this is what Habakkuk heard about. And this is what he amazed him. God, how can you use this to accomplish good? Is that really good? And God says, this is what I'm going to do. And what brings the question here in my mind, and in many minds, is, okay, God, you're sovereign. And I know in history there have been some terrible things that have been done, and it seems like those terrible things that were done were stopped by more terrible things. I think of what happened in Europe during the 1930s through 1940s when Nazism grew and became the power source in the nation of Germany, and the end result was a Holocaust, and over 6 million Jews and other groups were killed off and murdered and gassed, and terrible, terrible thing that the people did. But then you look at what happened to Germany after that. What happened? The Soviets came in, and they were more brutal in some respects than the Nazis. They came in and did what? They raped and pillaged that whole nation, especially the city of Berlin. Now, was that God doing that? Was God punishing Germany with somebody that even was equally inhumane? Stalin was known to have killed over 20 million of his own people. And he marched his army in there and utterly destroyed the nation of Germany. Was that God? I don't have the ability, I'm not ready to say yes or no to that, but I will say this. I don't think God had to put it into Stalin's heart or the Soviet people's heart to do that. All he had to do is go like this and say, do what your heart leads you to do. I think of in our own country not too many years ago when the Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, and 5,000 people suffered and died. Tens of thousands of people suffered, but I think, was it about 5,000 people died during that terrible incident? And I think about that. Was that God's hand? Now, some theologians say God is sovereign. That's what the Bible teaches us. There's nothing that happens without God's planning it and even conducting it and making it happen. I don't have an answer for that. But I do have, one answer I do have is that we need to, it does cause people to stop and say, my goodness, we are a frail people. We suffer. We ought to be awake to the fact that our days are numbered. What about 9/11? Was that an act of God when terrorists flew those airplanes into the Trade Center or into the Pentagon, or took over an airplane and it was crashed in the fields in Pennsylvania, and all those thousands of people died, innocent people? Was that God's action against the United States or against the prosperity of the United States or whatever it is? And I'm going to say, I don't know. God is sovereign. But I do know that God didn't have to put it in the hearts of the terrorists to do that. It was already their inclination, but he can go back and say, do what's in your heart to do. And we can use these things, whether or not we're comfortable with those kind of statements or not. We can at least look at this and say, you know something, God? It's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call that my life is short. I am like the grass that is out there today. It's green, and next week it's brown and mowed over, and it's gone. We think we have a long life, and from our perspective, we may have 70, 80, 90 years. But God says, your days are numbered. Take a look at what's going around you. Are you ready to come and meet with me? Do the things in this world bother us? Are we ready to say, God, I want to see changes? Well, so anyway, that's God's answer to Habakkuk. When he says, God, where are you? He says, well, I'm active. I'm at work. I'm behind the scenes. Things are going to change. They don't go on forever. But why do they go on? Best answer God has for us is in 2 Peter when he says, a day is to God like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. And he says, because people even in Peter, and when Peter was writing this his letter, they were saying, where is your God? People are still going on and doing whatever they want to do. And Peter writes, he says, God is patient, not willing that any should perish. So one of the strongest answers we have is from God's own mouth. He's saying, listen, I'm patient with evil because I want people to be forgiven. I want them to understand that there is accountability. I want them to wake up, and I want to be able to forgive them because they came to me and saw in me my forgiveness through Jesus Christ and his death on the cross for our sins. And that is one of the best answers I have when people say, why doesn't God stop evil? I'm going to say, well, whose evil are you talking about? Well, they're evil. What about your evil? Are you ready? Well, I'm not as evil as them. And I say, you're not. You're not as bad as them. But you still need forgiveness. And God wants you to be forgiven. Well, let's take a look at how Habakkuk responds here, because now he's got even a bigger complaint. Verses 12 through the end of the chapter, he reads, or Habakkuk says, are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We shall not die, O Lord. You have ordained them as a judgment, and you, O rock, have established them for reproof. You who are pure, you who are of pure eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? You make man like fish in the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out of the net and gathers them with the dragnet. He rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and makes offering to his dragnet, for by them he lives in luxury, and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? Now let's just talk about this idea of fish in the dragnet and this person who comes and he catches them, and what's going on here. It's a little poetry here, but he's describing, we're the fish. The Babylonians are these fishermen, God, and what they do is they put this dragnet. The idea of a dragnet, it's behind a boat, and it's pulling, and it captures every single thing in its wake. And he's not satisfied with one catch. He's got to keep going over and over and over again, and he's got to wipe out all the fish. Is that what your intention is, God? You're just going to wipe us all out with the Babylonians? I know we've done evil, but we're not nearly as evil as them. He says, are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? Will we not die? You, O Lord, have appointed them to judge, and you, O rock, have established them to correct. Look how many times Habakkuk here is using that covenant name with God. The word Lord here is Yahweh. It should have been capitalized, but it's not. In this slide, I'm not sure why. The word Lord there, it's Yahweh. He's talking about this Holy One, his rock. So we have a covenant relationship with you, God. We're Israel. We're your people. And you're going to wipe us out. What about the Abrahamic covenant? What about that? Are you going to discard all of us? He says, your eyes are too pure to approve of evil, and you cannot look on wickedness with favor. Why do you look with favor on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those who are more righteous than they? His complaint is, God, I know we deserve some discipline, but do we really warrant total destruction? Are you through with us? And that's the question now he has. One of the questions that we ought to have is this here. God, sometimes I do struggle. Sometimes I do have my doubts. Sometimes I look at life and I'm saying, God, I just don't sense your presence in my life, and I don't sense it in my family's life, and I just don't feel like you're there for us. And so the thing is, what do we do with our doubts? What do we do with the times when we do struggle? And again, like I said earlier, if you say, I don't have any doubts, I'm very happy for you and I'm glad for you, but you will have doubts. I think everybody has doubts. It's part of our human nature to wonder and doubt the presence of God. The question is, what are you going to do with these doubts? What are you going to do with times when you're saying, God, I don't see where you're at, or I see the answer to my prayers is not what I intended to do. God, if it was me, I would have disciplined us, but I certainly wouldn't have done it with the Babylonians. That's just not right. But what does Habakkuk do? He does what we all ought to do at times like this. He doesn't ruminate, or he doesn't go over in his mind and his time and again about his doubts. He doesn't let his mind be filled with other people who doubt God and try to say to them, there is really no God, or maybe the deists are right. The deists are people who believe that God created the world, but now he's just left us on our own. Maybe they're right. Maybe he's up in heaven laughing at us because we're so confused and he's always in control. But that's just not who God is. God is here. And what do we do when we have these doubts and when we struggle? Look what Habakkuk does, and he does the right thing in chapter 2, verse 1. I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me. And I will answer concerning my complaint. What does he do? He goes back to God. Say, fine, God, I have my doubts. I'm going to keep quiet. I'm going to stay here and just wait to see what you're going to do. God is never put off, never angry, never frustrated at us when we come to him with our doubts. That's what we're supposed to do. You're never going to catch God off guard like, gee, God, I guess you didn't think I was going to struggle over this. God's going to say, I knew you were going to struggle over it. I've known you since before you were in your mother's womb. I've known all about you. I've watched you grow up. I've been involved in your life growing up. I've seen it. I know you're going to struggle and doubt in times because, you know something? All of God's people struggle with doubt at times. What do you do with it? Do you give your heart over to the naysayers, to the people who say, there is no God? This God that you believe in doesn't exist, or he's a cruel God, and you're pretty much on your own, and that feeds you, and that's what Satan does. He'll feed your doubt. He'll feed your confusion. He'll feed your fear and your frustrations and your anger. Or do you come before God and say, God, I don't have an answer yet. I'm still doubting. In fact, I'm a little bit frustrated and even angry, at what's going on here. But I will take my stand before you and wait. That's what God wants us to do with our doubt. Next week, we're going to get into chapter 2 here, and hopefully we'll have some more answers. Father God, thank you so much for your goodness. Thank you that, when we doubt and when we struggle, when we see the evil, that we have your word to bring us comfort, to bring us encouragement, to strengthen our faith and help remove the perplexity of life versus the goodness of God. Father, we know you are good. We know you're at work. We know we can't see all the things that you're doing. But like your prophet Habakkuk, let us stand still and wait upon you during even our deepest times of struggle. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.